The fighting pit was alive with noise. Metal walls vibrated with the sound of drums, alien voices, and the roar of creatures waiting for blood. Bright lights cut through the smoke, showing the massive arena where beings from across the galaxy had come to witness another match. Everyone wanted to see the helpless suffer and the strong rise. It was a cruel tradition, a sport that made warriors into legends and prisoners into corpses. In the center of the pit stood a young alien girl. She had long hair that shimmered in the strange lights, and her delicate features made her stand out among the beasts and killers who usually fought there. Her slender frame was bound by chains, and her fox-like ears twitched nervously as she looked around the circle of shadows. She was no fighter. Everyone in the crowd knew it. They laughed and shouted, betting how quickly she would be torn apart. High above, alien lords and war chiefs leaned forward in their seats. They had captured her for amusement, deciding that the daughter of a rival world should serve as entertainment in this brutal arena. The match was set. She would be thrown against a creature that no ordinary soldier could face, a beast with black scales and teeth like knives. It growled from the gate, waiting to be released. Among the crowd was a human. He was not supposed to be there. He had slipped past guards and hidden himself in the shadows. His eyes were locked on the girl below. He had heard whispers of her capture, and something inside him refused to let this play end in silence. The galaxy feared the pits because no one ever returned, but he knew fear could not rule him now. When the gates opened, the beast thundered forward, its roar shaking the ground. The girl stepped back, her chains rattling, her eyes wide with terror. The audience screamed in delight, hungry for blood. Yet before the monster reached her, the crowd gasped. A figure had dropped from above, slamming into the dirt with force that echoed. Dust rose, and through it stood the human. He had no armor, no weapon. His fists were bare, his chest scarred from battles long past. Chains wrapped around his belt like trophies, and his eyes glowed with the fire of someone who had already decided he would not die here. The alien lord shouted in anger, demanding to know who he was, but the people in the seats leaned closer, curiosity burning stronger than their fury. The girl looked at him in shock. She had never seen his kind before. Humans were rare in these parts of the galaxy, spoken of in half-forgotten legends as reckless, stubborn, and impossible to break. He glanced at her once, a silent promise that she was no longer alone, then turned his full focus on the beast. The creature charged, black scales scraping sparks against the ground, jaws wide enough to crush steel. The human did not run. He sprinted forward, each step shaking with raw force, and met the monster head-on. The impact was like thunder. His fist smashed into the beast's snout, knocking its head aside. The crowd screamed louder, torn between fear and awe. The alien girl felt her heart pound. This stranger had thrown himself into certain death, but he moved like no one she had ever seen. Every muscle in his body carried the weight of survival, and every strike held the fury of a world that refused to kneel. She realized he wasn't fighting only for himself. He was fighting for her. In that moment, the fighting pit was no longer entertainment. It had become something else. The galaxy had come to watch a sacrifice, but instead they witnessed a defiance that would echo far beyond those walls. The beast shook its massive head, stunned by the force of the human's punch. Its jaws dripped with glowing saliva, sizzling as it hit the ground, and its scales glistened under the arena lights like molten armor. The crowd erupted into a storm of noise, some cheering, others shouting in anger. None of them had expected a man to step into the pit, and even fewer believed he could stand against such a monster. The alien lords sat back in disbelief. They whispered among themselves, trying to understand who this reckless human was and how he had slipped into their arena. They had seen humans before, miners, traders, even mercenaries, but never had they seen one leap unarmed into a death match. Humans were known for their unpredictability, but this was madness. The girl stood frozen, her chains rattling lightly in her trembling hands. She wanted to cry out, to tell him to run, but her voice would not rise above the thunder of the crowd. She watched him crouch, his body moving with a predator's focus, eyes fixed on the beast that circled them both. It was no longer just her fight. Somehow, her life had been tied to his. The monster lunged again, its claws slashing with the speed of lightning. The human ducked, rolling across the dirt, his chains clanging as he twisted aside. Dust sprayed into the air, and the beast roared in frustration. Before the crowd could blink, the human leapt forward again, grabbing hold of one of the creature's ridged scales. His muscles strained as he pulled himself onto its back, locking his arms around its thick neck. The alien audience leaned forward in shock. Who would dare ride a pit beast? The creature thrashed wildly, slamming its body into the walls, trying to throw him off. Sparks rained as metal screamed, but he held on, his face tight with determination. The girl's eyes widened. She had never seen anyone with such courage. For a brief moment, the beast managed to throw him down. He hit the dirt hard, rolling across the ground as the creature towered over him. Its jaw opened, teeth glistening with firelight, ready to bite down. The crowd howled, thinking it was over, but the human surged up again, his fist smashing directly into the creature's lower jaw, snapping its head backward. The pit echoed with the sound of bone and scale cracking under raw human strength. The alien lords stood now, their eyes locked on the scene. Impossible, one muttered. No human can do this. Yet there he was, blood dripping from his knuckles, refusing to fall. The girl's chains tightened as she stepped closer. She did not know why, but every part of her wanted to believe in him. Her heart beat faster, not only from fear but from something deeper, something that told her this human was different. The beast roared again, furious now, its tail whipping across the ground like a blade. The strike sent the human flying against the wall of the arena. Pain shot through his body, but he pushed himself up, coughing, spitting out blood, and still staring at the monster with eyes that blazed with fire. The crowd erupted, no longer sure who they wanted to see win. Some screamed for the beast, others shouted for the human. The pit had never seen such chaos. The air vibrated with tension, and the girl felt it sink deep into her chest. She realized something else. He had not come into the pit for glory or for survival. He had come for her. A complete stranger had risked his life, facing a monster no one dared to fight, simply to save her from certain death. And in that moment she swore silently to herself that if he survived this, she would never forget the human who jumped into the fighting pit for her. The arena floor was torn with claw marks and broken stone. Dust still lingered in the air, glowing under the bright lights above. The human stood firm, his chest heaving with heavy breaths, while the beast circled him once more. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his stance showed no fear. He looked like a man carved from stone, unshaken even after being hurled into the wall. The crowd had grown restless. Many had risen from their seats, unable to look away. What had begun as a cruel game now felt like something greater. They had seen countless warriors, mercenaries, and gladiators fall in this pit, but never had they seen one rise again and again after blows that should have ended his life. Some shouted in anger, others cheered in disbelief. The pit was alive, with chaos. The alien girl clutched her chains tighter. Her heart raced as she stared at him. She did not know his name, nor why he had risked everything to leap into the pit. But the way he stood between her and the beast told her more than words ever could. His body was battered, yet he moved with purpose, as if protecting her was the only thing that mattered. The beast lowered its head, eyes glowing with fury. With a thunderous roar, it charged again, faster this time. The human sprinted toward it, meeting the monster head-on. The ground shook as they collided, the sound like stones smashing against steel. For a moment it seemed as if the human would be crushed under its weight, but he twisted to the side, driving his elbow into the beast's neck. The strike sent the creature staggering, its claws carving deep furrows in the dirt as it struggled to stay upright. Gasps spread through the crowd. The alien lords leaned forward, their eyes narrowing. "This is no ordinary man," one whispered. Another sneered, "He cannot last. No human can endure such punishment." But even as they spoke, the human was already on the move again. He rushed toward the girl, breaking her chains with a single strike of raw strength. The shackles snapped like brittle glass. She stumbled forward, shocked, staring at her freed wrists. For a heartbeat she could only stare at him, not knowing if she should run or stand at his side. The beast's roar snapped her back to reality, It lunged once more, mouth wide, teeth shining with hunger. The human pushed her behind him, planting his feet into the ground like roots. As the creature descended, he caught its lower jaw with both hands. The crowd erupted in screams as the human held the monster's jaws apart, muscles straining, veins standing out across his arms. It thrashed, drool burning holes into the sand below, but he refused to let go. Every second felt endless. The girl stepped forward, her voice trembling as she cried out for him to hold on. She had no weapon, no strength to aid him, but her voice carried into the chaos, and for the first time she felt she was part of his fight. The human's roar echoed through the pit as he forced the beast back, shoving with every ounce of power he had. Dust rose in waves and the crowd fell into stunned silence. Then with a final surge, he twisted and slammed the monster into the ground. The arena shook with the impact. The girl's eyes widened in awe. She had never believed such strength was possible. Around them, silence hung for a moment, broken only by the heavy breaths of the human as he stood above the fallen creature. The beast lay dazed, its body heaving as it tried to rise again. But the human did not let it. He stepped forward, his fists clenched, ready to strike again if the creature moved. His body was bleeding, his strength stretched to its limit, yet his presence filled the arena like a storm no one could stop. The crowd erupted once more, some chanting for the beast, others for the human. The pit was no longer a simple execution, it had become a story. And in the girl's heart something new had begun to grow. It was more than gratitude, more than relief. It was a spark of faith in a stranger who had chosen to fight for her when no one else dared. The beast rolled onto its side, snarling as it tried to regain its footing. Dust clung to its scales, glowing red under the pit lights. The human stood over it, his chest rising and falling like a drumbeat, his knuckles raw with blood. The crowd was divided now, half screaming for the creature to tear him apart, half roaring for the human to triumph. No one in the arena had ever seen a moment like this. The alien lords above were no longer calm. They argued, their voices sharp. Some demanded the human be killed instantly for breaking into the pit. Others whispered about letting the fight continue, their curiosity stronger than their hatred. They had all underestimated him, and now even they wanted to know how far a human could go when pushed to the edge. The girl stayed close to him, her wrists still sore where the chains had been. She had never been free in this arena, not even for a second until now. She studied the man who stood between her and death. His body was battered, his face streaked with dirt and blood, but there was no hesitation in his eyes. He looked at her once, and that single glance gave her strength she had never felt before. The beast roared again and lunged, tail whipping like a giant blade. The human grabbed the girl and pulled her to the side just as the tail smashed into the ground, shattering the stone floor where they had stood moments ago. Shards of rock sprayed through the air, cutting across his arm, but he held her steady, making sure she wasn't harmed. The girl's heart pounded. She wanted to tell him to stop, to save himself, but the words would not leave her lips. She could see that nothing she said would change his mind. He had made his choice when he jumped into the pit. He wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting because he refused to let her die alone. The human picked up one of the broken chains from the ground, wrapping it around his fists like a weapon. The crowd roared at the sight, sensing the battle, reaching a new stage. The beast slashed with its claws, but he ducked under the strike and swung the chain with brutal force. The metal whipped across the creature's face, sparks flying as it cut deep into its scales. The beast shrieked, stumbling, backward, blood dripping from the wound. The noise of the arena grew deafening. Aliens pounded their fists against the walls, some chanting for the beast, others chanting for the human. It was no longer a fight of man versus monster. It had become a clash that shook every corner of the arena. The girl found herself shouting, too, her voice carrying through the chaos. She didn't even realize the word she cried until it left her lips. It was his name. Not because she knew it, but because her heart gave it to him. She called out to him like he had always been meant to stand there fighting for her. The human struck again, the chain snapping across the beast's neck. With every blow, the monster weakened, its movements slower, its growls fading into desperate roars. Yet the human himself was near exhaustion. His arms trembled, his breaths were ragged, but he never stepped back. The beast made one final desperate charge. The human braced himself, planting his feet into the broken earth. When the creature lunged, he drove forward with all his strength, wrapping the chain around its neck and pulling with a roar that shook the air. The beast thrashed, claws scraping against the ground, tail smashing into the walls, but the chain only tightened. The crowd fell silent, every eye fixed on the impossible sight of a human dragging down a monster bred for slaughter. The girl covered, her mouth, her eyes wide, tears burning in the corners. And then the beast collapsed, crashing into the dirt with a force that rattled the arena walls. The chain snapped free and the human stumbled back, barely standing but still unbroken. For a heartbeat, the entire pit was silent. Then the arena erupted with noise, the sound of thousands of voices roaring, each one knowing they had witnessed something unforgettable. The girl looked at him, her voice trembling as she whispered the words only he could hear. "You came for me." And though he did not answer, the fire in his eyes told her she was right. The beast lay still, its massive body twitching as the last of its strength drained away. Dust settled slowly over the arena, covering broken stones and splatters of glowing blood. The human stood above it, swaying slightly, his chest heaving, as if every breath carried the weight of the galaxy. His body was torn and bruised, yet his spirit burned brighter than ever. The crowd did not know how to react. Some screamed his name without even knowing it. Others cursed him, demanding another fight. The noise shook the pit, but above it all the alien lords sat in silence, their eyes narrowed, their voices sharp with anger and unease. This was supposed to be a simple execution, entertainment for their people. Instead, the human had turned their pit into a stage for defiance. The girl stayed close to him, her steps cautious as she moved across the cracked ground. She had never been so close to anyone who carried such raw power, yet she did not fear him. She could see the pain in his eyes, the cuts across his skin, but also something deeper, a determination that refused to die. He had fought for her, a stranger, and in doing so he had shaken the foundations of the arena. One of the alien lords rose from his seat, his voice carried across the pit, cold and commanding. "This fight is not over. One beast is not enough. Release the next," the crowd gasped, then roared in approval. Heavy gates began to creak open, their chains rattling as shadows stirred behind them. The girl's heart froze. They would not allow him to survive. The lords wanted him broken, torn apart in front of everyone, to remind the galaxy that no one defied their power. The human lifted his head slowly, sweat and blood dripping down his face. He did not protest, did not plead. Instead, he straightened his back, clenched his fists, and stood ready. His silence was louder than any words. He would not bow. The girl grabbed his arm, her voice shaking. "You cannot fight again. You'll be killed." He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw not arrogance but truth. He had already accepted what he must do. He had not come to the pit to survive. He had come because she was trapped here. And as long as she lived, he would fight. From the shadows of the gate, another creature stepped forward. This one was larger, armored with spiked plates, its eyes burning with unnatural fire. It growled low, each sound like thunder rolling through the pit. The crowd roared louder than ever, bloodlust filling the air. The girl felt her knees weaken, but the human's hand touched hers, steadying her. His grip was strong, though his body trembled. He guided her behind him once more, placing himself as a wall between her and the monster. The beast charged, claws tearing up the ground. The human braced, his muscles screaming as he prepared for impact. At the last moment, he rolled aside, pulling the girl with him. The creature smashed into eye, the wall stones shattering like glass. Dust and rubble rained down, but the human never let go of her hand. He found a broken spear lying among the wreckage of past battles. Its shaft was cracked, but the blade still sharp. He lifted it, the weapon small compared to the beast. But in his hands it looked like hope. The girl's breath caught as he stood once again between her and death. His body bent but not broken, his spirit burning though surrounded by shadows. The alien lords glared down at him, Furious that he would not fall, the crowd screamed for blood, but many voices now shouted for him. Against all odds, a human had captured their respect. The girl pressed her hand to her chest, her heart pounding with fear and awe. She did not know how long he could endure, but one thing had become clear. No matter how many beasts they sent, he would not let her face them alone. And as the next battle began, the arena no longer belonged to the alien lords. It belonged to the human who had turned their cruel spectacle into a legend. The second beast stomped forward, its massive body casting a shadow across the arena floor. Its spiked tail scraped the ground, leaving deep gouges in the stone. The human gripped, the broken spear tighter, his knuckles white, his body trembling with exhaustion. He was bleeding from his side, his legs heavy from the last fight, but his eyes remained sharp. He would not back down. The girl stayed behind him, her heart pounding as she watched. She knew he was close to collapse, yet the way he stood made it clear. He would rather die than let the creature touch her. The crowd roared with excitement, their voices shaking the walls of the arena. Some still cheered for the beast, but many now cried out for the human. His defiance had struck something deep inside them. Even in this pit of cruelty, they could not deny the power of his will. The beast lunged, claws slicing through the air. The human spun to the side, slamming the broken spear into its shoulder. The blade sank deep, black blood spraying as the creature roared in pain. The arena trembled from the sound. The human was thrown back by the force, tumbling across the ground, the spear snapping in half as he hit the dirt. The girl cried out, rushing toward him, but he pushed himself up before she could reach him. His breaths were ragged, his arms shaking, but he still forced himself to rise. He looked at the beast, then at her, and a small smile touched his lips, as if to reassure her that he would not give up. The beast swung its tail, smashing into the ground where he had stood moments before. He rolled, grabbing a shard of stone from the broken floor. It was jagged and sharp enough to cut his hand as he held it, but he raised it anyway, ready to use even broken rock as a weapon. The alien lords above grew restless. Their voices clashed, some demanding his death, others insisting he be captured alive. They had begun to fear the symbol he was becoming. If a single human could defy them this way, what would happen if others followed? The fight raged on. The beast charged again, jaws snapping. The human ducked under its bite, driving the shard of stone into its throat. The creature shrieked, blood sprang across the dirt. He pulled it free and struck again, each blow fueled not by strength alone, but by fury and willpower. The crowd gasped, their voices turning into a thunderous chant. The girl's eyes filled with tears as she watched him fight. She had been raised to believe the pit was unescapable, that no one could survive it. Yet here was a man breaking that truth with nothing but his bare hands and stubborn heart. She pressed her hand against the cold wall, whispering a silent prayer for him to stand. The beast thrashed wildly, its tail striking his back and sending him sprawling to the ground. The shard flew from his grip. He coughed, spitting blood, his vision blurred. The monster loomed over him, its massive claws lifting. For the final strike, the girl screamed, rushing forward without thinking. She threw herself toward him, her small hands pulling at his arm. He looked at her, surprise flashing in his eyes, but also something else, an unspoken promise. He used her strength, as small as it was, to push himself up. As the beast's claw descended, he lunged forward with one final roar, driving the jagged stone shard deep into the soft place under its jaw. The arena shook as the creature collapsed, its body hitting the ground with earth-splitting force. The human fell to his knees, covered in blood and dust. His chest rose and fell heavily, but he was alive. The girl dropped beside him, rapping, her arms around him without thinking. Above them, the alien lords were no longer entertained. They were furious. What should have been a simple execution had become rebellion. And though the human's body was nearly broken, the fire in his eyes burned brighter than ever. The crowd, once divided, now roared together, not for the beast, but for the man who had turned the pit into a legend. The second beast's corpse lay heavy on the broken stones, its blood spreading in dark pools across the arena floor. The air was thick with smoke, sweat, and the roar of thousands of voices. The human knelt, his arms trembling, his breath harsh and uneven. He had survived 2 monsters, but his body was pushed to the limit. The girl stayed by his side, holding his arm as if she could keep him from collapsing. She whispered softly, begging him to stop, but his eyes stayed fixed on the towering seats of the alien lords. He knew the fight wasn't finished. He could see it in their faces. Anger, fear, and the need to crush him before his defiance spread any further. One of the lords rose, his cloak shimmering with symbols of power. His voice echoed through the arena. "This ends now. Bring forth the champion." The crowd fell silent. The champion was not a beast, but something far worse. From the shadows, armored footsteps rang out, heavy and slow. The gate opened and a figure stepped forward, a towering alien warrior draped in jagged armor, his body marked with scars from countless battles. He carried a double-edged blade that glowed with red light, forged to kill swiftly and brutally. "TT." Crowd erupted in cheers. This was the fighter they had been waiting for, the one who had never lost. The human, broken and bloodied, was nothing but prey before such a foe. The girl's heart froze. She had heard of the champion, whispered stories, of how no one who faced him had lived. She turned to the human, shaking her head, tears in her eyes. "You can't fight him. No one can." The human looked at her, his face pale but steady. His lips curved into the faintest smile, a smile that carried no arrogance, only resolve. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, as if to calm her fears, before pushing himself to his feet. His body wavered, but his spirit did not. The champion strode forward, his blade dragging sparks from the stone. He looked at the human with contempt, as though staring at an insect. "You should have died with the beasts," he growled, his voice low and sharp. "Now I will end you myself." The human said nothing. He tightened the chain still wrapped around his fist, the only weapon left to him. He stood tall, his shadow, long across the broken ground, a man prepared to face death without flinching. The girl gripped the edge of her torn dress, her chest tight with fear. She wanted to scream at the lords to stop this madness, but she knew they wanted him destroyed. They would not rest until the human's defiance was buried. The crowd began to chant, some calling for the champion, others daring to shout for the human. The noise rose like a storm, shaking the very walls of the arena. For the first time, the lords lost control of their people. The champion moved first, swinging his massive blade. The human dodged, the strike slamming into the ground with a thunderous crack, spraying shards of stone into the air. The human countered, wrapping his chain around the alien's arm and yanking with all his strength. The champion staggered for a moment, surprised by the sheer defiance in the move. But the human's body was breaking. Every strike, every movement drained what little strength remained. He knew he could not win through power alone. His only chance was his spirit, the very thing the galaxy never understood about humans. The girl watched, her voice trembling as she whispered to herself, "Don't fall. Please, don't fall." The champion struck again, faster this time, and sparks flew, as the human barely dodged. The fight had only begun, but already the arena felt like the heart of a storm. 2 forces clashing not just for survival, but for what they represented. And as the battle raged, the galaxy's cruelest spectacle was transforming into something far greater. The champion moved like a storm of steel, each swing of his glowing blade heavy enough to split stone. Sparks and dust filled the air as the arena floor cracked under his strikes. The human dodged and weaved, his body slow from exhaustion, but his eyes sharp with focus. Every breath burned in his chest. Every step sent pain shooting through his legs, but still he moved forward, never backing away. The girl pressed her hands to her chest, her eyes wide with fear. Each time the blade missed him by an inch, her heart nearly stopped. She had thought the beasts were terrifying, but this was different. The champion was not a mindless monster. He was a killer with skill, strength, and purpose. And the human, broken and bleeding, looked far too fragile to withstand him. The champion sneered, circling his prey. You are no warrior. You are only a fool who thinks courage can win." His voice echoed through the pit, filled with cruelty. The human spat blood, but his lips curled into a faint smile. He said nothing, only lifted his chain-wrapped fist again. The silence was louder than any insult. It told everyone he had no intention of yielding. The champion roared and lunged, his blade flashing in the lights. The human twisted aside, the edge grazing his shoulder and cutting deep into his flesh. Blood poured, but he clenched his teeth and struck back. His chain snapped across the champion's helmet, sparks flying as metal clashed against metal. The crowd exploded with noise, some howling in rage, others shouting in awe. The alien lords shifted in their seats. Their carefully built spectacle had spiraled out of control. Instead of fear, the crowd was divided. Instead of obedience, they were watching rebellion unfold in front of their eyes. The girl moved closer to the edge of the fight, her fear fighting against her hope. She could see he was near collapse, but she could also see something else, the fire that refused to leave his eyes. Every blow he landed was not just for himself, but for her. And every time he stood again after being knocked down, it was proof that he carried more than just strength. He carried a spirit that could not be broken. The champion grew frustrated. His blade slashed again and again, each strike meant to crush the human completely. But no matter how many times he was thrown to the dirt, the human rose again, fists clenched, chain ready. He fought like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The crowd began to chant louder, first scattered voices, then dozens, then hundreds. They called for the human, their voices rising against the will of the lords. The pit shook with their cries. The alien lords shouted angrily, demanding silence, but the people only roared louder. The champion pressed harder, his strikes like falling hammers. The human stumbled, blood running down his face, his vision blurring. He collapsed to one knee, and for a moment the girl thought it was over. Her heart clenched, tears burning in her eyes as she whispered his name, though she had never been told it. The champion raised his blade high, preparing the final strike. The crowd fell silent, holding its breath. The lords leaned forward, their eyes shining with cruel delight. But before the blade could fall, the human surged upward with a roar that shook the pit. His chain lashed around the champion's arm, pulling with all his remaining strength. The blade smashed into the ground instead of his skull, sending cracks spiderwebbing across the arena floor. Dust erupted, covering them both in smoke. The girl gasped, her hope reigniting as she saw him still standing, still fighting. The champion snarled, tearing free of the chain, his armor dented, his pride wounded, his fury growing. He had thought this fight would end quickly, but now he understood the human would not stop. Not until death itself forced him down, and as the smoke cleared, the crowd began to chant louder than ever, their voices echoing across the galaxy's cruelest stage. Not for the champion, but for the man who refused to bow. The arena floor was cracked and broken, smoke still rising from the last clash. The champion stood tall, his armor dented but his grip on the glowing blade unshaken. Across from him, the human staggered, blood dripping from his arms and shoulders, his breath shallow. He looked like a man who had already given everything but still refused to fall. The crowd's voices rose louder, the sound shaking the air. They were no longer divided. Thousands of throats roared for the human. The alien lords shouted from above, demanding silence, but their words were drowned out. For the first time, the pit belonged not to them, not to the champion, but to the man who had defied death again and again. The girl's heart pounded as she stood at the edge of the fight, her hands trembling. She wanted to rush forward to shield him somehow, but she knew she could not. All she could do was believe. Her eyes locked on his, and for one heartbeat, she thought he glanced at her and drew strength from the sight of her standing there. The champion lunged forward with a roar, his blade sweeping down with devastating force. The human sidestepped, the edge grazing across his chest, leaving another line of blood. He winced but clenched his jaw, driving his fist into the champion's ribs. The impact shook the warrior for a moment, but the alien was too powerful, shoving him back with the weight of his armored shoulder. The human stumbled but caught himself. His legs shook, his body screaming in pain. But his spirit burned hotter with each passing moment. The crowd roared louder, chanting in rhythm, their voices carrying him forward. He raised his chain-wrapped hand once again, defying the pain that tried to pull him down. The champion growled, fury in his eyes. He was not used to struggle, not used to a fight that tested him. He swung again, faster now, his blade carving sparks from the stone. The human ducked and weaved, each dodge slower but still sharp. He grabbed a broken spear haft from the ground, spinning it in his hand like a weapon reborn. The fight grew desperate. Steel clashed against chain. Sparks flew as stone weapons struck, armored plates. The champion struck again and again, but the human never yielded. Every move was slower now, but every strike carried the weight of his will. A refusal to kneel, a refusal to let the girl die. The girl shouted his name, though she had never known it. Her voice carried into the pit, cutting through the chaos. The human turned his head for only a moment, and that was enough. The champion's blade came down, slamming into the ground beside him, missing his neck by inches. The arena shook with the force. The human seized the moment. He wrapped his chain around the blade, pulling with everything he had. Muscles tore, blood poured, but he wrenched the weapon sideways. The champion staggered, shock flashing across his face as the human drove the broken spear haft into the gap of his armor. The strike sank deep and the champion roared in pain. The crowd erupted, thousands on their feet, voices thundering in unison. The lords stood now, their fury visible, their control slipping from their hands. They had wanted a spectacle of obedience, but instead they had birthed a legend. The human fell to one knee, nearly collapsing from the effort. His vision blurred, his breaths shallow, but he forced himself to stand again, dragging the chain in his hand. The champion pulled the spear haft free, blood pouring, his fury now greater than ever. The fight was not over. The champion raised his blade once more, his roar echoing through the pit. The human stood ready, battered and broken but unyielding, the crowd's chant lifting him higher than his body alone could carry. And in that moment the girl understood. This battle was no longer about survival. It was about something larger, something that would shake the galaxy. The human had already changed everything. The arena shook with every heartbeat. Dust hung in the air, glowing under the harsh lights. The human stood swaying on his feet, chain, dragging across the ground, his body broken yet unbent. Across from him the champion roared, blood dripping from the gap in his armor, his glowing blade raised high. This was the final clash, and the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The girl clung to the edge of the pit, her voice hoarse from shouting. She had no power, no weapon, but her heart burned with the desperate wish for him to survive. She had been ready to die when thrown into this arena. Yet this stranger had leapt into hell itself to fight for her. She could not bear to see him fall now. The champion charged, blade sweeping down with unstoppable force. The human ducked low, rolling across the cracked stones, his body screaming in pain. He came up behind the champion, wrapping his chain around the alien's throat. The crowd gasped as he pulled with every ounce of strength left in him. The champion staggered, choking, thrashing wildly to break free. But the alien was too strong. With a roar, he tore the chain loose, flinging the human across the arena. The man slammed into the wall, blood spraying from his mouth as he crumpled to the ground. The girl screamed, her heart shattering. The crowd's roar faltered, fear seeping into their voices. The champion lifted his blade again, walking toward the fallen man. Victory was his. The lords above leaned forward, satisfied at last that the defiance would end. Then the human moved. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up, his arms trembling, his legs barely holding. Blood ran freely down his face, but his eyes burned with fire brighter than ever. He raised the broken spear haft still clutched in his hand, its edge jagged but sharp. The crowd roared again, louder than before, chanting his defiance. The champion hesitated for a heartbeat, unsettled by the sound. That pause was all the human needed. With a final surge of strength, he leapt forward, slamming the spear haft deep into the wound he had already carved in the champion's armor. The alien warrior howled, staggering back, the glowing blade slipping from his grasp. The human tore the weapon free and struck again, his roar echoing louder than the beast's. The champion stumbled, his armor shattering under the relentless strikes, And then he fell to his knees. The arena fell silent. The human, shaking and bleeding, lifted the broken weapon high, then drove it down one last time. The champion collapsed, the ground trembling beneath his weight. The pit's greatest warrior had been slain, not by another alien, but by a single human who refused to bow. For a heartbeat there was silence. Then the crowd erupted in thunderous roar, their voices shaking the skies. They chanted for the human, their cheers drowning out the Lord's furious cries. The pit had never seen such a moment, and it would never forget it. The human staggered, nearly falling, but the girl was already at his side. She caught him, her small arms steadying his broken body. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You saved me." He looked at her, his eyes weary but still burning, and managed a faint nod. Words were beyond him, but he didn't need them. The truth was clear. Above, the Lord shouted for guards, for order, for punishment. But it was too late. The people no longer listened. The chant for the human grew louder, rising like a storm that could not be silenced. The girl held him, close, her heart full of awe. He had not just fought for her, he had changed everything. He had turned the pit from a symbol of fear into a symbol of hope. And as the arena walls trembled with the cries of thousands, the legend was born. A legend of the only one who dared to jump into the fighting pit, not for glory, not for survival, but to save an alien girl.